In Virginia, the Pentagon built a second government underground and spent the next 15 years denying it was there. In Utah, they spent $22 million investigating a ranch where animals were turning up in conditions no veterinarian could explain, then closed the gates and never released the findings. And off the coast of New York, they bred infectious diseases for 70 years, quietly shut the lab down in 2025, and have never fully accounted for what came off that island. 7 places, all on American soil, all forbidden, all documented, and none of them fully explained. We begin in Utah. 512 acres of sagebrush and creek in the northeast corner of the state. The local Ute tribe has asked outsiders to stay off this land for over 150 years, and they have never said why. In 1994, a family bought it anyway. Within 20 months, they walked off the property and left almost everything behind. The furniture in the house, the livestock in the fields. 3 of their dogs had run into a field one evening, and the next morning, in the spot where the dogs had been, there was nothing left but a patch of scorched ground. The family told investigators they had also seen lights moving low over the pasture at night, in patterns no aircraft could fly. Animals on the ranch were turning up in conditions their veterinarian could not account for. Whatever they had seen in 20 months on that land, they decided was worth more than the price of it. In 1996, a Las Vegas businessman named Robert Bigelow bought the ranch not to work it, but to watch it. He moved physicists onto the property. He moved biochemists. He moved former military intelligence officers. They built a permanent observation post and ran it around the clock for almost a decade. What they recorded has never been released in full. In 2008, the Defense Intelligence Agency, an arm of the United States Department of Defense, wrote Bigelow's company a $22 million check to continue the work. The program had a name, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program. Its existence was confirmed in 2017 by Senator Harry Reid of Nevada. The reports themselves run to dozens of volumes. The public has been allowed to read fragments. The ranch changed hands again in 2016. A Utah real estate executive named Brandon Fugel bought it and kept the cameras running. Fugel is a successful, well-known businessman with no obvious reason to invent things. He has gone on record saying that what happens on the property has shaken his own view of reality. His team has documented strange readings on their instruments inside specific zones of the ranch, readings that vanish the moment you step outside those zones. GPS units that drift hundreds of feet on the property and work normally everywhere else. Investigators who walk into the affected areas in good health and walk out the other side with injuries no one can explain. The official scientific position is that all of this is anecdotal. Even when the reports come from federal employees with security clearance, and even when they come from the same agency that wrote the check. The ranch is now fenced. The roads in are gated. It is closed to the public. What the Defense Intelligence Agency concluded, after 10 years and $22 million taxpayer dollars on that valley, the United States government has decided you will not be told. The second place is 250 miles southwest of the Utah ranch. In the Nevada desert, there is a place that did not officially exist for almost 60 years. From 1955, when it was first built as a test site for the U-2 reconnaissance plane, until the 15th of August 2013, when the Central Intelligence Agency released a declassified history that confirmed it on paper, the United States government did not acknowledge the base at Groom Lake. Pilots flying commercial routes had been instructed to alter course around it. Satellite operators had been told its coordinates returned no imagery. The airspace above it, restricted to a ceiling of unlimited altitude, was marked on aviation charts simply as a box of forbidden sky. The name the public uses, Area 51, comes from a numbered grid the Atomic Energy Commission used for the surrounding Nevada test site. The base sits on a dry lake bed at the edge of a mountain range, about 83 miles north of Las Vegas. There is a single paved access road, gated and guarded. Signs at the perimeter authorize the use of deadly force. There are no overflights. Phones do not connect once you cross a certain line in the desert. What is known about the work performed there is a list of aircraft. The U-2, the SR-71 Blackbird, the F-117 stealth fighter, all developed and tested at Groom Lake decades before the public ever saw them. What is suspected to have been worked on there is a separate and longer list, the contents of which depend on which retired engineer is talking. The most enduring testimony came from Robert Lazar, who claimed in 1989 to have worked at a facility south of the main base called S4 on the reverse engineering of craft that were not built by any human program. His credentials were partially disputed and partially corroborated. He gave the interviews in disguise, then under his own name, then went quiet. Lazar is still alive. He has never changed his account. Whether or not you believe him, the base itself is one of the most secure pieces of land on the planet. It has a budget that is not voted on in any public session of Congress. Several thousand people work there every day, flown in from Las Vegas on unmarked Janet Airlines. They have signed agreements that bind them for life. Whatever is happening behind that fence, the federal government has decided that the cost of telling you is higher than the cost of not telling you. Move east about 500 miles into the high mesa country of northern New Mexico. The small town of Dulce sits on the Jicarilla Apache Nation reservation near the Colorado border. The population is fewer than 3,000. There is one main road, a post office, a school, a casino. Almost nothing about Dulce as a town suggests anything unusual. What does suggest something unusual is the geology directly beneath it. In the 1880s, a young rancher from the nearby town of Eureka named Frederick Spencer Oliver wrote a manuscript he claimed had been dictated to him by a being he encountered on the mountain. The book described a refugee civilization, survivors of a lost continent called Lemuria, living inside a city under the mountain called Telos. Oliver insisted he was a stenographer, not an author. The book was published in 1905, 6 years after his death. It has never been out of print. From the 1930s onward, hikers, climbers, and Forest Service personnel have reported, with a consistency that does not fit normal forest behavior, lights moving along the upper slopes at night, low humming sounds heard at specific elevations, and bell-shaped clouds, lenticular formations, that hover above the summit on clear days when no other clouds are in the sky. The lenticular clouds are real and photographable. The standard explanation is mountain wave physics, air forced over a peak, condensing in a stationary lens shape. This is true. It is also true that pilots who fly small aircraft in the region report sudden navigation instrument failure near the summit, returning to normal after they descend. There is no instrument station on the mountain that monitors this systematically. Restrictions on climbing above a certain elevation are not imposed by the United States Forest Service. They are imposed by tribal councils, and the Forest Service has chosen to defer. You can climb Mount Shasta with a permit. Most people who do come back and say nothing was strange. A small number come back and refuse to discuss it. Move east, all the way across the continent, to the eastern tip of Long Island, New York. About 2 miles off the coast, in the waters of Long Island Sound, there is a small island called Plum Island. It is 840 acres of beach, forest, and brick laboratory buildings. There are no homes on it, there are no hotels. The only way to reach it is by federal ferry, departing from a dock at Orient Point, and the ferry only carries personnel cleared by the United States Department of Homeland Security. The island was acquired by the United States Army in 1899 and operated as Fort Terry, a coastal defense installation, through the end of the Second World War. In 1954, the Department of Agriculture opened the Plum Island Animal Disease Center on the site. The official mission was to study highly contagious livestock diseases that the government considered a threat to American agriculture: foot and mouth disease, African swine fever, Rift Valley fever. That is the public history. The other history was uncovered in 1993 by a Long Island newspaper reporter named John McDonald, who reviewed declassified documents from the late 1940s and early 1950s. Those documents indicated that the original purpose of Plum Island, as conceived by its founders inside the Army's Chemical and Biological Warfare Division at Fort Detrick, was to develop biological weapons that would be used against livestock in the Soviet Union. The same documents established a direct intellectual lineage to a Nazi germ warfare program on Insel Riems, an island off the German Baltic coast, whose lead scientist was debriefed by American officials after the war. In 2004, a New York attorney named Michael Carroll published a book called Lab 257, based on declassified files, employee interviews, and his own access to the island. Carroll documented decades of outdoor tick experiments conducted on Plum Island in the 1950s, when the laboratory was studying the weaponization of disease vectors. He also drew a geographic observation. In July of 1975, in the town of Old Lyme, Connecticut, less than 10 miles north of Plum Island and directly downwind, two mothers named Polly Murray and Judith Mensch began reporting an unexplained outbreak of joint inflammation in local children. Yale physicians initially diagnosed 39 children and 12 adults with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. 6 years later, in 1981, a researcher at the National Institutes of Health named Willy Bergdorfer identified a spiral bacterium inside the gut of a deer tick. The disease that bacterium caused is now called Lyme disease. It infects roughly 30,000 Americans every year. The official position of the United States government is that there is no connection between Plum Island and Lyme disease. The official position is also that there is no connection between Plum Island and West Nile virus, which first appeared in North America in 1999 in a borough of New York directly across the Sound from the island. Both denials are on the record. In 2018, the Department of Homeland Security abruptly banned even pre-approved outside visitors from the island. The 2 United States senators from Connecticut and 1 senator from New York wrote a joint letter to the Secretary of Homeland Security demanding an explanation. The explanation has not been made public. Research at the facility was officially terminated in September of 2025. Decontamination of the laboratory complex is now underway. When that process is finished, the island will be sold by the General Services Administration to whatever entity is willing to take possession of 70 years of accumulated soil samples, sealed buildings, and federal silence. Move west again, about 300 miles, to the Blue Ridge Mountains of Northern Virginia. Drive 48 miles from Washington, D.C., on a state route called Blue Ridge Mountain Road, until you reach a high ridge above the small town of Bluemont. There is a chain link fence here, topped with barbed wire. There is a guardhouse. There is no sign explaining what is behind the fence. Locals call the place Mount Weather. The federal government, for many decades, did not call it anything at all. The site was originally a National Weather Bureau observatory, opened in the late 1800s. In 1936, it passed to the Bureau of Mines, which used it to test new tunneling techniques. In 1954, the Army Corps of Engineers began boring permanent tunnels into the granite under the ridge, under a code name, Operation High Point. The facility was completed in 1959. Its purpose was continuity of government, the constitutional doctrine that the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the United States must be able to function during and after a nuclear attack on Washington. Mount Weather was designed as the relocation site. Above ground, there are about a dozen support buildings on roughly 430 acres. Below ground, there is a complex of approximately 600,000 square feet with its own power grid, its own water reservoir holding 500,000 gallons, its own hospital, its own police force, and a high-frequency radio system that connects to most federal agencies and the United States military, and allows the president to access the emergency alert system from inside the mountain. Senior federal officials were divided, for purposes of continuity, into 3 teams. Alpha would remain in Washington, Bravo would relocate to Mount Weather, and Charlie would disperse to other sites. The facility was prepared for activation during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was fully activated once, during the Northeast blackout of November 1965. For the first 15 years of its operation, the federal government did not acknowledge that Mount Weather existed. The facility's existence was an open secret inside the national security community, sufficiently known by the early 1960s that a 1962 political thriller called 7 Days in May described it under a thin alias, with driving directions accurate enough to lead a reader to the gate. But the public did not know, and the press did not press the question. That changed on the 1st of December 1974. A Boeing 727 operating as TWA Flight 514 en route from Indianapolis to Washington was diverted to Dulles in heavy weather and instructed to begin an approach descent. Due to a miscommunication between the cockpit and air traffic control, the aircraft descended too early and struck the western face of Mount Weather at 500 miles per hour. All 92 people on board were killed instantly. Wreckage scattered across a ridge approximately a mile and a half from the facility's main entrance. The journalist who responded to the crash site noticed a fenced government compound nearby, guarded by armed personnel. Within days, the Washington Post had identified the facility by name. The Department of Defense, asked to comment, said it was not authorized to discuss what Mount Weather did. The facility was reorganized under the Federal Emergency Management Agency in 1979 and remains in operation today. The 1974 annual report of the Federal Preparedness Agency, the predecessor body to FEMA, stated that work at Mount Weather involved, among other things, the management of domestic political unrest in scenarios involving material shortages and industrial strikes. That language was published in an annual report and then never elaborated upon in any subsequent public document. The facility has been activated, in part or in full, an unknown number of additional times. The Department of Homeland Security confirmed an activation in April of 2015 during a regional power interruption, but did not specify which officials were relocated or for how long. The plaque that briefly marked the impact site of TWA 514 has been removed, by parties unknown. The ridge is fenced. The fence is patrolled. The mountain is one of the most important pieces of land in the federal government, and the government's preference is that you not know it is there. Move north and slightly east, 400 miles, to the East River of New York City, between the Bronx and Rikers Island. There, in plain view of the Manhattan skyline, is a 20-acre island that no one is allowed to set foot on. Its name is North Brother Island. It has been abandoned for over 60 years. From the deck of a passing boat on a clear day, you can see the brick shell of a hospital building rising out of a forest that should not exist on a piece of land that size, in that location, in the middle of one of the most photographed harbors on Earth. The city of New York acquired the island in 1885 and built Riverside Hospital on it, a quarantine facility for patients with smallpox, tuberculosis, typhus, and other contagious diseases. The hospital expanded throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and at its peak it operated as a self-contained medical city, with staff dormitories, a chapel, a coal house, a morgue, and a dock. On the 15th of June 1904, a sidewheel steamboat called the General Slocum, chartered by a Lutheran church in Manhattan's Little Germany neighborhood for an annual women's and children's picnic, caught fire in the East River. The captain, William Van Schaik, chose not to land at the nearest piers, citing the risk of igniting lumber yards and gas tanks on the Bronx shoreline, and instead steered the burning ship toward North Brother Island. The Slocum grounded itself approximately 25 feet from the island's beach. Nurses from Riverside Hospital ran into the water and pulled survivors from the wreck. Roughly 321 passengers lived. 1,021 died. Until the attacks of the 11th of September 2001, it was the largest loss of life in New York City history. 3 years later, in 1907, the New York City Department of Health forcibly committed a young Irish cook named Mary Mallon to Riverside Hospital. Mallon was the first identified asymptomatic carrier of typhoid fever in the United States. She had infected at least 7 of the 8 families she had worked for as a domestic cook. She did not believe she was sick because she had never been sick. She was released in 1910 on the condition that she never cook again. She resumed cooking immediately, infected another 25 people at a hospital for women, and was returned to North Brother Island in 1915. She remained there, in a small bungalow next to the main hospital, for the next 23 years. She died of pneumonia on the island in 1938. She is buried in the Bronx. The hospital closed as a quarantine facility in 1943. After the Second World War, the island was used briefly to house veterans and their families during a citywide housing shortage. In the 1950s, the city reopened it as a treatment center for adolescent heroin addicts. The program was closed in 1963 after investigations established that staff corruption and abuse of the patients had become endemic. The buildings were locked. The dock was abandoned. No one has lived on North Brother Island since. It is now classified by the New York City Parks Department as a forever wild bird sanctuary. Trespassing is illegal. Permits are issued only to researchers, journalists, and occasional municipal staff. A photographer named Christopher Payne was granted controlled access between 2006 and 2014 and documented the ongoing collapse of the buildings over multiple seasons. The roofs are gone. The interiors are full of trees. In the rooms where typhoid patients died, where teenage addicts were strapped to beds, where Mary Mallon spent the last decades of her life, ivy has grown through the floorboards. A 2015 city study explored opening the island to limited public access. The recommendation was rejected. The reasons given were structural safety and protection of nesting black-crowned night herons. The island remains closed. 7 places, 7 files, none of them complete. A ranch in Utah where the Defense Intelligence Agency spent $22 million and published almost nothing. An air base in Nevada that did not officially exist until 2013. A mesa in New Mexico where the federal government spent years discrediting a man for asking what was under it. A volcano in California that 4 separate tribes agreed, independently, was not to be climbed. An island off Long Island that bred ticks and infectious diseases for 70 years and was decommissioned without an accounting. A mountain in Virginia that holds the federal government's replacement seat of power and was officially nameless for 15 years. An island in the East River where the dead from a steamboat fire and the deathbed of Typhoid Mary now lie under 60 years of forest. Which of the 7 stayed with you the longest? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Remember to subscribe and like the video, and I will see you in the next one. There are more places like these, and they are closer than you think.